Thank you everyone for coming out to the Jack Falla Speaker Series this afternoon. For those of you who don't know, the Speaker Series is a tribute to the late Jack Falla, who was a former sports journalism professor here at BU, who sadly passed away 5 years ago. Among the many things he was known for here at BU were he would host 8 a.m. classes to make sure only the dedicated students would be there. He was great at keeping in touch with his students, what he called them, his mafia. And he would always bring in great guest speakers. So to honor him, to keep with that, we bring in guest speakers for the speaker series, and they come in. And so I'm happy to introduce Mark Feinsand. Mark is a Com alum and is a Yankees beat writer for the New York Daily News. He's in town covering the Sox Yankee series, and so we're lucky to have him. So please welcome Mark Feinsand.
As he said, I'm Mark Feinsand. I'm the Yankees beat writer for the New York Daily News and a proud card-carrying member of the Jack Falla Sports Journalism Mafia. I didn't know about that term until I got a job, and then Jack said, well, now you're a member, so congratulations. I'm at the Daily News since 2007. I was at MLB.com from 2001 through 2006, covering the New York Yankees also. FoxSports.com for a couple years before that, 99 to 2001. Sports Business Daily as a staff writer and assistant editor from 1996 to 1998. And my first job was at Sports Ticker, keeping score of baseball games for $7 an hour. So your first job out of college, not always the one you're going to have the rest of your life. It's a huge honor for me to be here today, not only to be speaking in Com for the first time since I graduated 17 years ago, but to be doing it in this series named after my mentor. It's just a huge honor and a huge privilege. Jack Falla is single-handedly responsible for me being a sports writer. When I got to BU in the fall of '92, I went to Com 101, like I'm sure almost everybody here did, for a week or two of every little bit of communications lectures and try to figure out what we all wanted to do with our lives. I actually came here wanting to be a film major. Tim Burton was sort of what I had in my head. And I had actually planned on going to USC. I'd gotten in, and through some random series of events, I didn't go there, and I ended up at BU, but good film program. I figured, all right, I'll still do the film thing. And I got here, and I don't remember who was speaking, and it's probably better off as a result of what I'm about to say, but the film lectures bored me to tears. They were just tedious and technical, and I found myself going, I don't know if I want to do this for the rest of my life. So I didn't. 2 weeks later, the journalism lectures came, and here's Jack Falla speaking in front of us, telling us about his days covering Wayne Gretzky for Sports Illustrated, and all these great sporting events, and how he was able to really use his passion for sports to emphasize his writing, and I was just taken. From the minute he got up on the stage, I said, this is what I want to do. I'm a huge sports fan. I've grown up loving sports my whole life, and you know, I'm a decent writer, but I could probably get better at that. But I know sports, and I want to write sports. And so I basically changed to become a journalism major right there and then, put film away, went to journalism. I was actually a broadcast journalism major, but I did a lot of writing, wrote for the Daily Free Press, covered golf for them for about a year and a half. BU golf, it's worth that. So we did, took all the prerequisites of that, and then at the end of my sophomore year, I heard that Jack was bringing back his sports journalism class. He hadn't taught it in quite a while. And I said, well, I have to get into that class. There's no two ways about it. One problem, he was only taking 20 students, and he was only taking seniors and grad students, and I was going to be a junior. So I didn't really fit the bill for what he was looking for in this class. I wasn't going to be told no. They weren't sure if they were going to have the class for more than one semester. He had not committed to doing it beyond that semester. So I said, all right, my best friend Denise and I said, we have to get in this class. Let's just figure out a way to do it. Don't know how we're going to, but let's do it. So we went to his office, and we said, we would like to register for your class, but we're going to be juniors, etc. We got shut out during registration. Please let us in. He said, no. So he said, I'll tell you what. My class is at 8 a.m., as anybody who's ever taken the class with Jack knows. That's what time he teaches. As my roommate from college back there knows, I'm not an 8 a.m. guy. He had to wake me up for a lot of them. But Jack said, show up the first day, show up at 8 a.m., and if 2 people don't show up, you guys get up the spots. If one person doesn't show up, one of you can have the spot. Her last name started with an A, mine starts with an F. That wasn't going to work for me either. We showed up on the first day, about 7:45, and we sat there with the first people in class, and I counted one by one as people walked into the room. 1, 2, 3, 4, 19 people show up, obviously. So we stay for the class, we go and walk over to Jack after the class, and he says, all right, well, I got 19, so one of you guys can stay. And he just starts putting his stuff in his briefcase, and Denise and I are sort of looking at each other uncomfortably, trying to figure out, well, how are we going to do this? I'll fight you if you want. I think I can win that. We're looking at each other, and we don't know how this is going to work. And Jack puts the stuff in his briefcase. He looks at us, and he goes, never mind. You can both stay. We'll all grind it out together. He picked up his stuff. He said, I'll see you next class. And he walked out. We both just sort of stood there, like, this really worked. We're in this class. All right. I can tell you, it was one of the few A's I got at BU. I was not a very studious type. But I did get an A in that class, and it really made me know that this was something I wanted to do for a living. I enjoyed it. It didn't feel like work. And a lot of other classes that I took felt like work. And this was enjoyable. I liked sitting down and writing a story. I liked interviewing people and doing everything that you needed to do to succeed. So I would say that that class was obviously the one that stuck with me more than anything else I did at BU. And as a result, I stayed in touch with Jack for many years. His office was right across the street from comm. I used to stop in there when I was in the area or after class. I knew when he was in his office. We would chat about projects and hockey and sort of whatever there was. Jack was a pretty easy guy to talk to. You know, it was important to me to have a guy like him to have sort of helping guide me. He'd been in the industry for a long time. He had wrote Sports Illustrated. He had done a whole bunch of other stuff, books, and you know, knew more about hockey. He'd forgotten more about hockey than I knew about any sport ever. He was a very, very big hockey guy. And then as I graduated, he helped me along in the whole job search thing, and you know, giving me advice on how to talk to sports editors and how to apply for things and where I should apply. And don't think you're getting a job at the New York Daily News out of college, because you're not. But you know, we would keep in touch. I would call him. He was not a big emailer for a very long time. Believe it or not, my graduating class in '96 was the last graduating class at BU not to be assigned an email address, which makes me feel incredibly old. But I started doing email. Jack took a few years. He eventually got into it. I did internships at WFAN, WEEI. I was a runner for ABC Sports. And the one thing I would tell you all, as you start trying to figure out this whole career thing, do as many internships as you can, meet as many people as you can. You never know where you're going to run into them down the line. I've run into people in all sorts of different areas, events, and wherever it be, and I say, I know that guy from somewhere. It turns out we interned together 20 years ago. So you never know who you're going to get to meet and who you'll eventually know who can help you with a story or a job interview or whatever it may be. When I got my first beat writer's job at MLB.com, I was very excited. I was going to go cover the New York Yankees, which for a kid growing up in New York was a pretty big deal. Big deal for anybody, but especially if you grow up in New York. And I remember calling Jack to let him know that I had gotten this job. And he was fascinated by the idea that I was a beat writer, but not for a newspaper. He didn't quite grasp what I was doing then. So where can I read your stuff? I said, MLB.com. I'll be writing the same stuff all the other beat writers do, but it'll just be online only. So he wanted to know, how is that different with your deadlines, and you know, what does this mean exactly? And you know, he wanted to hear as much about it from me as I had questions for him. So again, I would check in with him all the time, ask questions, because he had more experience than almost anybody I knew. When I got the Daily News job in December of 2007, after covering for 6 years for MLB.com, I was with my wife when I got the phone call from the editor at the Daily News, and I made 3 phone calls. I called my mother, I called my father, and I called Jack. And he couldn't have been prouder, and it was just phenomenal being able to share this news with him, that I had gotten this job at this newspaper, one of the 5 biggest papers in the country, covering their top beat. It was really awesome, and I was really excited to be able to share that with him. 9 months later, he passed away, and it was terrible. Sorry. The Yankees were going to be here 2 weeks later, and we had lunch plans, and it was awful. I wasn't able to go to the funeral, but somebody sent me the obituary, and I read it, and it was just amazing to see how many people had been touched by him the way that I had, and hearing about the sports journalism mafia and running into people who had him. It was incredible, sharing the same experiences and just knowing that this guy had touched a lot of people's lives. And I've had a lot of really pretty awesome moments during the 17 years since I graduated BU. Being here, speaking at a series named after him, pretty much towards the top. And I want to thank Dean Spovic for inviting me to be a part of this. I also want to recognize somebody else who's in the audience here. I'm looking over at him a little bit here. In 1995, during the playoffs, there was something called the Baseball Network. It was around for 1 year. It was one of the biggest TV disasters ever. ABC, NBC, and MLB had gotten together to basically form this thing called the Baseball Network, where they would be broadcasting the playoffs on all the different networks, and it lasted for 1 year, and it was just a huge bust. I was a runner for the Baseball Network at Fenway Park. I was still here, BU, and I was a runner, and I went to the ballpark, and basically they said, go get this, go get this, go get this. So I said, okay, I'll go get this. And there was one other guy working there with me. His name was Brian. We started talking, this and that, and what do you do, blah, blah, where do you go to school? And I said, what's your last name anyway? He said, Falla. I said, you're not related to Jack Falla, are you? He said, yeah, he's my father. Oh, okay. I took his class. So Brian and I became buddies that week, stayed in touch, saw each other from time to time. The magic of Facebook, we became Facebook friends and have kept in touch with each other through the years here. He's seen my kids, I've seen his kids, and when I heard about this, I emailed him and I said, are you coming? He said, of course. And so I want to thank Brian Falla for being here today. These are two kids who are probably the least interested people in the room, but I'm really psyched to hear it. Brian, I will say, you have inherited your love of sports analogies from your father, and your emails are always quite entertaining, and I can't wait to see what the next ones are. Back in that first day of sports journalism class, September 13th, 1994, Jack had a quote on board from the legendary Boston Herald sports writer Tim Horkin. And it said, it's not enough to love sports, you have to love the writing. And at the time, that wasn't the case for me. I loved sports a lot more than I loved the writing, but I understood it. And I think, I have whatever writing skills I have. If somebody sent me out to cover City Hall, I wouldn't do it as well as I do covering baseball, because I don't care about politics nearly as much as I care about baseball. So I think the idea that you need to have a little bit of passion for what you're writing about, if you have that, it's going to make what you do much better. I could go do City Hall if I needed to, but I wouldn't really enjoy it, I wouldn't really care. And I think, knowing your audience, especially in sports, there is no more particular audience of readers than sports fans, because they know more about their team, or at least they think they do, than you do. And I get more emails and more letters and more tweets and more whatever at this point from people saying, you got this wrong, or you're an idiot, or I can't believe you wrote that, you shouldn't have this job, they should fire you. Okay, that's fine. But I think it's very important to know, especially if you're going to get into sports, your readers, they know their stuff most of the time, but you have to write for the most diehard fan, and you have to write for the people who are very casual observers and barely pay attention and will read a Yankee story and don't know who CC Sabathia is. So you need to figure out a medium where you're writing simplistic enough for those people and in detail enough for the people who watched the game last night, watched the post game, were on Twitter during the game, and you're trying to figure out something new to tell them, something from the inside, and that's been the biggest challenge of the past 10 or 12 years with the invention of social media. Twitter in particular has ruined my life on many occasions. Everybody knows every stat. Everybody knows everything that happened in the game. People are watching the game on TV while going on Twitter, interacting with each other, with writers, with broadcasters, and if you want them to pick up the newspaper or log onto your website the next day, you got to bring them something that they don't know yet. And that's where access comes into play, and that's where developing relationships with the people you cover players, coaches, managers, executives, and being able to bring something to the table that they couldn't hear on the broadcast the night before, or that they didn't see on Twitter the night before. Jack gave us a list of suggested readings back in September of '94. Boston Globe, Boston Herald, USA Today's TV column, Sports Illustrated, the New York Post. I'll forgive him for that one. The Daily News was not available in Boston. The Sporting News, the Hockey News, Sport Magazine, and Inside Sports. Sport Magazine and Inside Sports do no longer exist. Sporting News is an online only, and there's no ESPN.com, CBSSports.com, MLB.com. Those didn't exist either. Or if they did, they were like in their really infant stages, and they were nothing like they are now. So the entire landscape of sports writing and sports journalism now completely different from when I went to school. So you can think about it and say, well, what I learned in school, well, almost none of it applies anymore. And so 15 years from now, the stuff that's being taught in comm now may not apply anymore either. And there may be things 15 years from now that none of us can even fathom exist. And so it's almost like we're teaching ourselves and we're learning on a daily basis now. This year alone, I started a podcast. I'd never done a podcast before. And 5, 6 years ago, I probably wouldn't have been able to tell you what a podcast was. Certainly not how to do one. This year I've done one. One of my buddies in the back there actually was hounding me all winter to do it. And I did, and it's been great. It's sort of like having my own little radio show every week that I get to host, produce, and decide everything that goes into it. And it's been great. And these things, as we've been going along in the business, every few years something else happens. 5 years ago, Twitter was barely a factor in our lives. Now, you can't cover a game without being on Twitter. The winter meetings that we have every year, the baseball winter meetings, have been destroyed by social media. Because all it is people tweeting out one rumor they hear after another. It doesn't have to have any fact or substance to it. It's heard this. CC Sabathia might talk to the Royals. There could be nothing to it. It could be a scout saying, hey, I heard CC's going to talk to the Royals in his most sarcastic tone. Somebody doesn't have the sarcasm meter and says, ooh, that's a big scoop, and just puts it out there. Then you spend half your day chasing down stories that never happened. So it's a very different landscape. One of my closest friends in the business is Peter Abraham, who covers the Red Sox for the Boston Globe. And when I made the move from MLB.com to the Daily News back in '07, Pete said to me, someday you're going to have a chapter in your journalism book about you. You're going to be the last idiot that went from a .com to a newspaper. And he's right. It doesn't happen very often anymore. It's usually the opposite way. But I think there is still a future in newspapers to some extent, certainly in New York. As long as New York, Boston, commuter towns still need newspapers. And until they have full wireless everywhere in every subway tunnel in New York, the tabloids are in a good business. So that's good news for me. Jack, it was funny, I've been prepping for this, and I told Micah this as I was starting to sweat about what I was going to talk about and how was I possibly going to fill this time. I found my notebook from Jack's class from 1994. My handwriting was a little better back then, so I was able to actually read some of it. And there were a few things that he told us that I thought were interesting, and I wanted to pass them along. So none of you can take Jack's class, but I'm going to try to pass along some of his words. Sports writing is not an absolute. And the example he used at the time was, some people love Mike Lupica's columns, some people hate Mike Lupica's columns. I love all of Mike Lupica's columns. He writes at the Daily News. Some people love tabloids, other people don't love tabloids. They'd rather read the New York Times. The most important audience you need to write for is the one who buys your paper and the editors who pay you. They're the audience that matters the most. But the way we cover stories, a lot of times, depends on where you write. A whole bunch of us, anybody remember the story earlier this year? Java Chamberlain and Mariano Rivera got into a little tiff in the dugout in Kansas City where Mariano was holding a press conference talking about some kids with cancer and a family who lost their son, and it was very emotional. And about 15 feet away, Java was screaming into the crowd, just barking nonsense at some friends in the crowd. And Mariano looked at him and said, hey, shh. And afterwards, Java looked at him in clear view of some reporters and said, don't ever shush me again, and got really loud and obnoxious, and the two of them sort of, it was uncomfortable. there were about 3 or 4 of us in the dugout that day. Myself, writer from the New York Times, a radio guy, and I think it was maybe the beat writer from Newsday. We all covered the story pretty differently. We blew it up and put it on the back page, because that's a pretty good story for a tabloid. The New York Times wrote a small piece, sort of just with the basic facts about it. The radio guy didn't realize it had happened. And Newsday wrote a pretty straight news story about it, blew it up a little more than the Times, but we clearly blew it up the most because for us, Jabba and Mo getting into this public display, that's a story. I mean, nobody talks to Mariano Rivera like that, right? So I think knowing who you write for, knowing your audience, probably as important as anything else. Jack had a list of the enemies of good sports writing. The first one, obviously, was the cliche. We can't help it if athletes use cliches. That's what they're taught to do. Anybody who's ever seen Bull Durham knows that. But that doesn't mean we have to use them in our stories and their quotes. It certainly doesn't mean we have to use them writing. Don't ever lead a story with, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It's already been used, don't do it. Hype. As Brian can attest, the only thing Jack hated more than having to talk on the phone was having an exclamation point in the story. So you don't need it. You can write words that get that across. It's lazy to use an exclamation point in your story. Under-reporting. This one you learn very quickly as you get into this business. There's no excuse not to do everything you can. Make every phone call you can. You may not think it matters. You may not think there's really a reason for the phone call. This guy probably doesn't know anything, but probably means there's maybe this much of a chance they do know something. Worst case scenario, the person says, sorry, I can't help you, and you've wasted 15 seconds of your life in a phone call. Best case scenario, they say, oh yeah, I heard something about that. All of a sudden you've got a story. A couple of the bigger stories that I've broken into the Daily News, I've broken through very unlikely sources, which I'm not going to tell you who they are, because they're sources. But yeah, you have to just do everything you can to give yourself a chance to succeed, and that means talking to anybody you can at all times, and even, like I said, even if you think, I'm going to waste my time talking to this person, you're not wasting your time, but if there's a 1% chance that you're going to get something out of it, it's worth it. You can't teach somebody how to write. You can teach reporting, you can teach format, you can teach angles, color, you can teach all that stuff, but you can't teach somebody how to write. The only way to learn how to write is to do it, and do it a lot. As I mentioned, I covered golf for the Daily Free Press. I have some of those at home. They're not good stories. I mean, I'm not sure I could write a good BU golf story now. Covering the BU golf team was basically calling the coach after the meet, after the matches, having him tell you what happened, take a quote or two, and just write out the scores with the quotes. And it wasn't covering BU hockey. But now I'm sure I could probably write a little better than I did, and that's just because I've been writing for 17 years. So if you want to be a writer, write as much as you can. Write for fun, write, go watch a game on TV and write a story about it. I have friends in the broadcast industry who have done the same thing. They would sit at home watching a game. They wanted to be a play-by-play guy. They'd watch a game with a tape recorder and just call play-by-play on a tape recorder and listen to it. Kenny Albert, who's been doing the NFL on Fox for 20 years, that's how he started. When he was about 12 years old, he would sit there and watch every game he could, talking to his tape recorder, and then listen back to it, see where he needed to get better. Same thing goes for writing. Just keep doing it, and that's how you get better at it. The toughest thing about being a sports writer, a young sports writer, is learning the most important rule of being in a press box. You can't cheer. And if you're a sports fan, that goes against everything you've ever known in your life. You watch a game, you cheer. You watch a game, you boo. That's how it is. That's why you got into sports, because you like the game, you're rooting for your team. You can't do that in a press box. And my first year covering the Yankees was 2001. That was the Derek Jeter flip play. That was them beating the Mariners with 114 games. That was the 9th inning home runs against Arizona. Scott Brocious, Tino Martinez, two of the most dramatic moments I've ever seen. Here I am, a Yankee fan for the first 25, 26 years of my life, and I can't cheer. That was a problem. We're out in Arizona covering Game 7, and Alfonso Soriano hits a home run to put the Yankees ahead. go downstairs, and we're outside the clubhouse. I have my assignments. They're going to win the World Series. My first year on the beat, I'm going to cover the Yankees winning the World Series and be in the clubhouse as they're spraying champagne all over each other for the 4th straight year. I was at the World Series as a fan the year before, so this was going to be kind of cool. And I was trying to figure out how am I going to not be really excited and be like a fanboy in the clubhouse as I'm trying to do interviews. Then we're watching on this little tiny screen as Mariano blows the save, and Arizona wins. And within 3 minutes, my boss and I are talking, trying to figure out, okay, I'm no longer writing The Dynasty is Alive, I'm no longer writing Alfonso Soriano, World Series hero, I'm no longer writing Paul O'Neill goes out as a winner. Now I'm writing Mariano Rivera blows the World Series, Paul O'Neill retires as a loser, and the dynasty's over. And I was so wrapped up in what I was going to write, how I was going to write it, and just the enormity of having to basically take every thought I had in my head for the last 20 minutes, turn them around and write something completely different, that it didn't even dawn on me the Yankees had just lost the World Series. And that was the moment when I realized that I couldn't care about the team and whether they win or lose. And if you're going to cover sports and if you're going to cover a team in particular, you can't care. You have to do your job whether they win, whether they lose, whether it's the greatest game you've ever seen in your life or whether it's a 15-1 blowout that takes 4.5 hours. And covering the Yankees, you see a lot of 4.5-hour games, especially right down the street here. But I think that was maybe the hardest lesson as a young sports writer to learn was you can't cheer, you can't care. And people always say to me, wouldn't you love to cover football one day? It's such an easier life. There's only 16 games a season. You're only on the road 8 days a year, 8 games a year. Right now you cover 81 road games and everything. I said, no, God, it's like the worst thing I could ever think of because I love football and I love the Redskins and I love watching my team on Sundays and even when they get beat up badly like they did yesterday. I love watching them. I don't ever want that taken away. You look at a sport differently when you're there working it than you do as a fan. And so if you don't think you can separate that, don't cover that sport. And if you like your Sundays of watching football, don't cover that sport. If you're a die-hard baseball fan and you can't imagine sitting in Fenway Park and not putting on a Red Sox hat and rooting for the Red Sox, don't cover baseball because you have to sort of just separate yourself from your life as a fan and realize you're there to work. And I think that may be one of the hardest things and something that it sounds easy, don't cheer, but when you've been cheering your whole life, it's not as easy as it sounds. And that brings me to something that Jack told us in that class as well, that I didn't remember until I looked at it in this notebook, but it made a lot of sense. He said, don't lose sight of the romance of the business. And I think that's important, because even though you can't cheer, I don't sit in the press box cheering baseball games anymore, but I still love baseball. And I still like watching games. And I still like, I sat at the World Series a couple of years ago, the Cardinals and the Rangers. The Cardinals had that amazing comeback in Game 6. They won Game 7. It was one of the greatest sporting events I've ever seen. And even though I didn't care who won, but just being there for this event was amazing. And you realize that you're pretty lucky to see some of these events that most people don't get to go to the World Series once in their life, let alone cover 6 of them or 7 of them. So, I've covered 7 World Series, I've covered 8 ALCS, I've covered 11 All-Star games, and I've seen some pretty cool things at these events. Even though I'm not there as a fan, you have to be able to appreciate the games and the events you're watching. In general, I think sports writers are a hardened, cynical group of people. How can we not be? Every third story I write is about steroids, contract disputes, some guy who makes $10 million committing a crime. I didn't get into this for this, and yet I wrote more Alex Rodriguez steroid stories in the last 5 years than probably anything else I've written about Alex Rodriguez. So it's easy to understand why you become cynical after seeing all this stuff and seeing a guy who's making $10 million not try that hard at a game or whatever it may be. But if you lose sight of why you got into it and the fact that you do love sports and the fact that, I had a friend who was a baseball beat writer who didn't really like baseball. And so it was a very tedious job for him. Going and covering 125 games a year, baseball games are long. 125 games a year, if you watch games at home, you can turn them off for a little while. You can flip on another channel for a while, or game's out of hand, 6th inning, turn it off and go do something else. Well, we have to stay till the end. We have to write about the whole game. And covering baseball it's a grind. And it's not as much of a grind as playing baseball for 162 games. It's close, and we don't get paid nearly as much as they do. One of my friends once joked to my wife, because I travel 150 nights a year on the road. I'm gone for spring training, I'm gone for all the road games, I'm gone for the whole postseason, some meetings in the off season. And one of my friends said to my wife, "You're just like a baseball wife, you just don't have the baseball salary." I said, "Well, that's not comforting." But it's something you have to understand, is athletes now are no longer really relatable to the people that cover them. Back in the old days, Bill Madden in my paper, the Hall of Fame columnist, he's telling us stories all the time about these times they went out drinking with this player, and they were out with this player, and he used to go out to dinner with this guy and his wife, and blah, blah, blah. That doesn't happen anymore. Back then, players used to work in the off-season. They didn't make that much money. They played the game, and then they went and did a construction job in the off-season, or they sold vacuums, or whatever it was. These guys now, even the lowest paid guys, they work out in the off-season and get ready for next year because they make enough money that they can live. Even the lowest paid guys the lowest paid guy in Major League Baseball made $500,000 this year. So he doesn't really have to work in the off-season if he doesn't want to. Some of them go play winter ball to try to get better so they can make more than $500,000 next year. But athletes in general are not as relatable with journalists to cover them just because of the salary structure of it. And because of that, you're not going to be friends with them as much as they were back in the 70s or 60s, but that's okay. And as long as you understand that, and you can separate the guys you cover and the sport that you're covering from personal feelings and fan feelings and all the rest of it, that's okay. At the base of it, a lot of these guys are just regular guys who happen to make a lot of money. And they're like every other group, people in your class, people in your dorm, people at your internship, people wherever. There's going to be some you like, there's going to be some you don't like, there's going to be some you get along with really well, and some guys you just want nothing to do with. So it's like everywhere else, and that's how you'll develop your sources. Will be the guys that you like and the guys you get along with, and that's important. And being able to relate to these guys who typically are unrelatable and you don't have very much in common with them, you need to be able to do that in order to succeed in this industry. But at its core, sports writing is still about the sports themselves, despite the steroid stories and the contract stories and everything else. And if you love sports, it's a pretty cool job to have. Here's the not cool part of the job, deadlines. Another quote Jack said once, "I couldn't imagine writing a story in 10 minutes. I can't imagine doing anything in 10 minutes. I'm lucky to find my notebook in 10 minutes. Jack clearly never wrote for a website. Sometimes 10 minutes is a luxury. Baseball in particular, as we all know, has no clock. You know, a football game is going to be 3 hours long for the most part, almost every time. Basketball game has a clock, hockey game has a clock. Baseball, I've seen 2 hour and 20-minute games, I've seen 5 hour and 20-minute games. Unfortunately, my deadlines are the same, no matter which length that game goes. And when I moved from MLB.com to the Daily News, that was my biggest fear. Because at MLB.com, we had suggested deadlines. 5 to 10 minutes after the game, they want to run a story. You know what, if you're 5 minutes late, the internet will still be there. So it was suggested, and if you missed them, okay, I mean, don't miss them by an hour, but if you miss them by 10 minutes, that's okay. Newspaper business, if you miss it by 10 minutes, guess what? Your story's not going to be in the newspaper. That probably gets you fired. So that's definitely the most stressful part of the job on a day-to-day basis is hitting your deadlines. When the Yankees play games on the West Coast, and the games end at 1:30 in the morning, and the paper's closing at 1:30 in the morning, that's a problem sometimes. So you end up writing some junky early story that you're hoping is going to be out of the paper, and the game goes long, and all of a sudden that story that you're not really all that happy about is being seen by everybody who's buying the newspaper the next day. So deadlines are definitely the most stressful part of the job, but as I said before, everything in this industry is changing. The newspaper business is no longer a newspaper business only. Our website, the New York Times website, the New York Post website, they've all been redesigned. Some of them are even pay sites now, which we're still seeing how that's working, because right now we give away our content for free. You don't have to buy the paper. If you want to get online, you can read it for free. Not a great business aspect there, but I'm not a business guy, so that's somebody else's problem. But we write for our website as often as we write for the paper now, maybe more often, and that's going to be what it is going forward. And you're going to have to be, we've all heard about the 24-hour news cycle, and cable TV sort of started that. The internet has now just made that much, much bigger and much more challenging. Back in the day, I hear stories, oh, we had to sit by our hotel room phone waiting for George Steinbrenner to call. But once you followed your story, you can go out for dinner, you go out for drinks, and go out and do whatever you want, and the paper was done. It was to bed, and that was it. We're on call 24 hours a day. Your phone's always there, bosses are always calling you, and between your paper's website, Twitter, Instagram, cable TV, everything else, you're never off. Right now I have somebody covering me for the Yankees stuff because I told them I can't write anything during this hour. So somebody's watching my beat right now, but after I'm done here, never know. I'm supposed to be off the rest of the day. I'm sure it won't happen. When I graduated BU, my father, who's sitting in the back over there, wanted me to go to graduate school. He said, wouldn't that be something that'd be good for you, journalism school or something? And I said, no, that's not going to happen. A, as I mentioned earlier, Jack's class was my only A in college. Wasn't really a studious type. The idea of going to more school, not appealing. But for the industry that I was getting into, I didn't think a graduate degree would really do much. And that's not to say that journalism degrees don't help or do something for you. I didn't think for what I wanted to do that any graduate degree was going to be better than going out into the real world, getting jobs and starting my career, meeting people and just doing what I wanted to do. I had internships, and I knew even from those internships that just meeting people was more important than almost anything I learned in school. And I think the hands-on experience is what, A, will help you determine what you want to do for a living, whether you enjoy doing it, and B, if you can do it. So I would say just get as many internships as you can, meet as many people as you can, talk to as many people as you can, and if they tell you no, call them back a month later and say, how about now? Because you never know what will happen. My career took a very sharp turn when I got my job at the Sports Business Daily in 1996. I was still set on doing this broadcast thing. I had interned at FAN and EEI. I wanted to be the next Mike Francesa or play-by-play or something. I liked the whole broadcast angle of it. I had a radio show at TVU here, and I liked that. And I really thought that's what I wanted to do. And then I got the job as a staff writer because there were no broadcast jobs and I needed to eat and pay rent and stuff. And I really found out that I liked it. And so I would say, even if you're a broadcast major, the writing is as important in broadcasting as it is in print. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to go on the air and do a broadcast job, you got to say something, and that means you got to write it. So the writing aspect of it is definitely the most important thing that you will learn here and that you will practice here and that you will need as you move into the communications field, whether you're going into PR, broadcast journalism, print journalism, it doesn't matter. If you can't write, you can't communicate. And that's definitely the most important thing I learned here and the most important thing I've learned through the years. One thing I never learned was how to speak to a little crowd of people in my alma mater. So this has been very overwhelming for me. Nothing will ever prepare you for that. I hope you all get the chance to do this at some point in your life, because it's very exciting. Let's take some questions. Brian.
Can you talk a little bit about the social media aspect and how your editors handle that? Obviously, they have no content or editorial, control over that content.
Right.
So how does that piece actually work?
Well, they have no editorial control over it,
But they have it over you.
but they have it over me.
Right,
So I know that if I tweet something that I shouldn't tweet, I'm going to get in trouble for it. You have to keep you can use your opinions, and I do. And I get into fights on Twitter with people all the time over whether Chris Stewart's a good catcher or not, or whether Phil Hughes is a good pitcher or not. I'm very widely known as a Phil Hughes defender, which angers a lot of Yankee fans right now. But I think the way I approach it, and everybody has their own approach, some people just throw caution to the wind and do whatever they want. I approach it as anything that I'm writing on Twitter has to be something that I would also write in the newspaper or on my blog or on something that officially said Daily News. On my Twitter handle, is Feinsand NYDN, so it is technically a Daily News Twitter handle. But I think different papers have different policies. Some papers are very strict with how they handle it, what you're allowed to do. ESPN has like a 42-page social media policy that my friends who work for ESPN love. So it's really, some people like to use Twitter as their outlet to do things, write things they can't write in the paper. I always look at it as I'm not getting paid to be on Twitter, so I'm not going to put myself in any jeopardy writing something that could get me in trouble. But at the end of the day, it's just not worth it. But Everybody has their own sort of approach to that. Editors love Twitter. They love linking your stories on there, getting people to the website. It's all about getting people to your website where they can sell ads and make money, because that's what we're all there for.
I'm Isaac, I'm a sophomore here. I was hoping you could talk a little bit about building relationships with players over the years and how that's helped you become a better writer, a better journalist.
Well, I don't know if it's made me become a better writer, but it's definitely made me a better reporter. Because when there's a closed door meeting in the clubhouse, you want to know about it, and you need to talk to somebody who was behind the closed door. It's tough. A lot of players live by the sanctity of the clubhouse rule. They won't go against that sort of mantra of what happens in here stays in here. Other guys don't care as much, and you can identify those guys, your job becomes easier. Like I said, there are people that you're going to naturally gravitate to, that you'll have something in common with. Maybe you're both hunters, maybe you're both fishermen, maybe you both like Xbox, maybe you both like the Redskins, whatever it may be. There are certain people that you'll just gravitate more naturally towards. It's strange, the people who I've become better friends with of the athletes I've covered are guys that if you took our backgrounds, we have nothing in common at all. I grew up in New York City, they grew up in a farm town, or they hunt and fish on the weekends, and I'm not hunting and fishing on the weekends. So sometimes you just get it off with a guy, and a lot of times it takes time. And in this era of free agency and trades and player movement the way it is, a lot of times, right when you become really tight with a guy, he's not on the team anymore. So that's another big challenge of your best source in the clubhouse is all of a sudden playing for the Minnesota Twins next year. You got to find a new source. So it's a constant evolving situation where you need to find people, because if you don't have people telling you what's going on the inside, you're not going to be on the inside.
I just had a question. I'm a big Yankee fan, so I was wondering what were your favorite players that you've covered over the years, and what are the harder ones that you've covered over the years?
My favorite guys are easy. Jason Giambi, without a question. Johnny Damon, Nick Swisher, Mariano Rivera, who's as classy a human being as I've ever met. These are all just good guys. And some of them were great quotes, some of them weren't great quotes, but you always enjoyed talking with them, they were respectful. The one thing I look for out of anything else when I'm talking to a player is respect. I'm there to do my job. And they may not like that I'm there to do my job, but they respect that I'm there to do my job. They understand why I'm there. Most players don't understand that without the media there to hype up their game and get it out to the public and everything else, they wouldn't make the money they make. There wouldn't be the interest in the game that there is because we write stories about them. And most stories we write are positive. Features on a guy. When's the last time you went to research a feature on a really negative feature about somebody? Nobody would ever talk to you if you were the guy who came over to write a feature that trashed them every time. The investigators seem to do that. So, I think the players that you enjoy covering are the ones who it's comfortable to stand there and just, shoot the breeze with their locker about whatever, about what movies have you seen, or what this and that. They're not necessarily the best quotes, but you do meet some very good people, and once in a while, like Jason Giambi or Johnny Damon, they're good quotes too, and that helps a lot, because having the go-to guys in the clubhouse who will give you good big picture stuff, they'll talk about a pitcher, they'll talk about a player, they'll talk about, what I found is most of these guys don't like talking about themselves, but they like talking about their teammates, they like talking about another pitcher, another guy they faced, a guy they have respect for on another team. Because you talk about yourself, you sound like you're bragging a lot. They'll let other people talk about them, but they like talking about other people, and most of the time, that's what you need.
You mentioned different media outlets approaching stories in a different way. How big of a difference was it between MLB.com and Daily News, and what was that adjustment period like for you?
It was a pretty big difference. I was at MLB.com from the first year that they were as they are right now, when the league owned all 31 sites. And the bottom of our stories, and I think they still have it to this day, says the story was not subject to the approval of Major League Baseball or its clubs. That's true. Nobody edited our stories. We didn't have to send them in to the teams and say, is this okay for us to post? But at the same time, you knew there was a certain tone. We used to joke amongst ourselves, the beat writers, that we're there to celebrate baseball. That's what we do. We're MLB.com, we're there to represent the league, and this is the league's website, the team's website. If you have a choice to take a positive approach or a negative approach, you're going to try to take the positive. That's not always the case at the Daily News. We like to stir it up. We have a back page, we have a front page. These are things that, you know, sell the newspaper. You need to draw people into the newsstand. They see your back page, you want them to buy that newspaper. So it's definitely a difference. My first few months at the Daily News, I would send in a story and one of the editors would call me and say, we need to sex up our lead a little bit. It's got to be a little more oomph to it. I eventually figured that out and, you know, used to write more of an AP style, and now it's a little more of a tabloid style. And that, it does take a little bit of an adjustment, but, you know, again, when you go to work there, you know where you're going to work. So knowing your audience and knowing the people you're working for and why you're there is very, very important.
Is it any different when you cover Red Sox Yankees games than if you cover any other games?
They're longer. It's a little different only because the interest in the series is bigger. You know that when I cover a game in Kansas City, there's a 99% chance that I'm going to be the only one from my newspaper there to cover it. When I'm at Fenway, there's 4 or 5 of us there from my newspaper to cover it. So as far as the coverage goes, we can cover a lot more angles. We have a lot more space dedicated to it in the paper. And because of that, you may get into some more minutia because you have so much more space and more people there to help you out. That's probably the biggest difference, just knowing that, you know, there are more eyeballs on it, more interest in it. I think that's probably the biggest difference. Covering it at Fenway Park, obviously, can be a little more challenging because it's a 100-year-old ballpark. They've made some nice renovations, but it's not quite as cushy. You got to go through the fans like you're salmon swimming upstream to get to the clubhouse. That's a little challenging. So that's, you know, the age of the ballpark and just the magnitude of the series typically are the 2 biggest differences of covering one of those series versus something else.
I listen to the Yankees on the radio a lot. How did you get to do the 5th inning? Is that because of your broadcast background, or?
No, actually, it's because I went to work for the Daily News. The Daily News has sponsored the 5th inning. It's the Daily News 5th for many years. I don't know when exactly it even started. As long as I've been covering the Yankees, whoever the beat writer for the Daily News is, has been going in and doing the 5th inning, and that's one of my favorite parts of my job. And my broadcast background helps, I think, just because I have an idea of how to speak on the radio. What really helps is knowing to stop talking when John Sterling has to call a pitch, because if you keep talking over the pitch, you'll get daggers shot at you from John, and then you can't talk for about a minute or 2. So that's probably the biggest thing in that inning. But no, it's one of my favorite things to do is that 5th inning, and the Yankees are moving to WFAN next year. I'm hoping the Daily News 5th moves along with it because it's definitely one of my more enjoyable parts of the game. It also helps me sort of pace my day. I know that I have to have all my early stuff done before I go on the radio, which is the opponent's half of the 5th inning. And then right when I get out of the 5th, I have to go and start my game story. So it's sort of a personal time clock of what I have to have done by that time and what I have to start doing afterwards.
You mentioned internships earlier. When did you start looking for internships?
I did my first internship the summer between my junior and senior year. And the only reason I didn't start earlier is because I had gone to summer camp for many, many years, and I wasn't ready to give it up. I worked as a counselor at the camp for 3 years, and loved it and wanted to keep going back. But I had friends who had done internships the summer between sophomore and junior year. A lot of internship programs now will only take you if you're going to be a senior. Like the WFAN internship that I did, you had to be going into your senior year. The MLB.com internship now, I think you have to be going into your senior year. You might even have to have already graduated, I'm not sure. The other thing that a lot of people now are very lucky about, most internships, at least the ones that I've run into people now, are paid. I never earned a cent. For a single internship I did, it was free labor, and I was happy to be there. You know, you got college credit, but it didn't matter. It was an invaluable experience of not only meeting people and having the experience of doing what you're doing, but just you start learning about what it's like to have to be at work on time and having to answer to a boss and having to do something right or pay the consequences. It's not, you miss a class, so you can either make up the work or talk to your professor or call in and say, hey, I'm not feeling well, I'm not going to make it. You call into the internship and say, I'm not feeling well, somebody else has to do that job. So it's good experience in terms of learning how the world works as well.
You
earlier desire to root for your team. Would you say that now you're a bigger fan of the Yankees than you were 15 years ago, or less of a fan?
Less of a fan. Trying to figure out how to phrase this without getting myself in trouble here. You run into people at if you're covering a team, there are some people the team you really like and you root for. There's some people the team you might not root so much for. But more than anything else, you just, like I said before, you can't care. The Yankees don't make the playoffs this year. I'm still going to have to write, I'm still going to have to work. I have to cover the offseason and whatever else it may be. I find myself now rooting more, especially the games I'm covering, you root more for individual people. You know, there are people you've run into through the years, you've covered them for a long time, who you have a genuine feeling for. You want to see them do well. I'll say who it is now because he's retired and we get along now, but David Wells, when he played, did not like reporters at all. I mean, it was just terrible. And we'd be doing an interview in a locker next to him and he would take out his aerosol right guard can, sort of spray it and go, "Reporter repellent." Funny guy. And he was just rude. You'd ask him a question, he'd belch, and that would be his answer. And it wasn't the most friendly guy to reporters. And so when he would go out there and go hitting him 2/3 and give up 6 runs, you're sort of like, you deserve that. So, Mariano goes out there and blows a save. You feel that Mariano's a great guy. You don't want to see him fail. I don't care. I'm going to write the story whether he gets a save or not. But you find yourself rooting for individual guys more than you do for the team. And especially when you work for a newspaper that covers the team and you have to cover the good and the bad, there are going to be guys on the team that don't really care for you either. So it's not, it's a give and take, it's a love and hate, and I would say definitely less of a fan because before I was doing this, if they lost, it upset me. Now I just don't care. Win or lose, it's all good.
Well, you kind of already answered, but since you were a fan before, when are you more excited to write the story? If it is like a positive story and that, like great play or something really awesome has happened, are you more excited to write that story?
I would say the 2 things I root for when I cover a game are time of game. The shorter the game, the better. Give you more time on deadline. You're not sitting through a 5-hour game. And really, you're rooting for the story. You're rooting for something interesting to write. I didn't care that the Yankees lost to the Red Sox last night. I cared that it was 9-2, and there wasn't very much interesting to write about it. You'd much rather cover an exciting game that is going to get your readership excited, and more people are going to want to read about it. Not many Yankee fans ran to the newsstand this morning to go buy the paper to read about the 9-2 game last night. If it was a bottom of the 9th walk-off where Ortiz hit a game winner off of Mariano in the 9th inning, people will probably be excited, not excited, happy, but interested to read about it. So I think we root for the story more than anything else, and that's why, like I mentioned, the Cardinals-Rangers World Series was one of the most epic Game 6 and Game 7s ever. I had no rooting interest or no stake in either team, yet it was as exciting an event as I've ever covered in my life, just because of the actual story that was unfolding in front of us.
Are the Yankees going to make the playoffs?
No.
She says no. If I knew that, I'd go to Vegas and bet on it, so I don't know. I think they have a chance, only because nobody else seems to want it. Tampa has been terrible, Texas has been terrible. In terms of the wild card race, well, the Red Sox are in the playoffs already, that's not an issue. But in terms of the wild card race right now, there's 6 teams going for 2 spots, and nobody wants to win them right now. They just keep playing mediocre baseball. But they're 3 out and 12 to go. They have a pretty favorable schedule. And Tampa and Texas play each other for the next 4 days, so at least somebody will lose each of those games, and the Yankees will have a chance to make up some ground. I think they'll still be in it next week when we get to the final week of the season. They have 3 against Tampa that week, so that series will be probably the deciding factor.
We're good.
We're good?
We did it. Everyone please.